Put your faith in the light.
Hello guys, welcome to another one of my videos. This is Lightblade, and in this one I'll be doing my Season 1 Retribution Guide for The War Within. As you guys know, I focus more on Mythic Plus, so you'll find extra tips for that specific content. But I will also cover the basic raids builds as well. And well, with that being said, let's get into the video. Okay, so the first thing we have to talk about is talents, but this time in the War Within we have something special added on top, which is hero talents. For Retribution Paladins, that is Herald of the Sun and Templar. As for the time of this video, both are viable for Mythic Plus and raiding content. The difference is small between them. Having said that, Herald does the higher theoretical DPS, but I'll be showing you guys builds for both of them. We're gonna start with Herald builds, but before, a small recap on Herald's main mechanics. The first one is Dawn Lights, powerful dots that also do cleave damage. You can apply them in two ways. The first one is after Wake of Ashes, your next two Holy Power Spenders will put it on your main target. And the second one is whenever you activate or proc wings, you will automatically apply them. The next mechanic is Sun's Avatar, also known as Yellow Lines. They do damage to anything between you and your Dawnlight targets. And well, that's pretty much it for Herald. Okay guys, now let's talk about the actual builds. So on the Paladin side of the talent tree, we're going to take most of our usual Paladin utility, things like Blessing of Sacrifice, Blessing of Protection. They're pretty flexible and can help save yourself or someone else. We're also going to be taking most of our crowd control utility in the forms of Fist of Justice to have a shorter cooldown on Hammer of Justice, and Blinding Light so we have an AoE stop. On top of that, we have some optional utility in the form of Cleanse Toxins. If the dungeon you have has poison or disease spell, you take this. If not, you can remove the point and put it here in Fist of Justice so you can still access your Blinding Light. On the last part of the talent tree, the only thing to notice is that we're not using Vengeful Wrath. Instead of that, we're using Divine Purpose because it synergizes pretty well with Herald of the Sun, because we have two ways of getting Divine Purpose procs. The first one is just randomly with the talent tree. The second one is with the talent Aurora from the Herald of the Sun. As for options in the Herald of the Sun, we only have two nodes that actually gives us choices. So the first one is Morning Star versus Gleaming Rays, in which Gleaming Rays just wins hands down, you know. It just increases your damage of your Holy Power Spenders by 5% whenever you have a Downlight active, and that thing is active all the time, you know. After that, we have Blessing of Anshia versus Lingering Radiance. This is also a non-contest. Just Blessing of Anshia just stomps over Lingering Radiance and becomes incredibly powerful with Hammer of Wrath, doing 200% extra damage when this thing procs. It has around a 2 to 3 procs per minute chance, you know. So other than that, we already saw the core mechanics of Herald of the Sun, the Downlights, and the Sun's Avatar, which are the yellow line thingies. Now let's move into the Retribution side of the talent tree. On the Retribution side of the talent tree, well, no surprise, we're going to be taking most of our AoE tools, but while still having some single target to deal with bosses. So things like Light's Justice is really powerful in AoE and single target because we just spam Blade of Justice. Remember, it works similar to a Divine Storm, in which it does uncapped damage while reduced after 5 targets. But the AoE is a bit small, so use it whenever mobs are clumped together. Other than that, we're taking things like Tempest of the Lightbringer, Steering Light, which got a lot of improvements since Dragonflight. Now it's a lot more reliable, and it can proc also pretty often in single target scenarios, because it not only procs from radiant damage, it can also proc from your High Lord's Mastery, you know, High Lord's Judgment Mastery, which is pretty good. After that, we have Burn to Ash and Radiant Glory. By the way, all the builds we'll be talking today are going to be Radiant Glory Crusade builds. So yeah, every build is a 30-second red pally build. After that, we have Burn to Ash, which is going to synergize really well with Herald of the Sun, making all the dots that Herald of the Sun does, you know, the Dawnlights plus the Sun's Avatar, and even things like Sunseer that also leaves dots, get increased by 30% while Truth's Wake dot is on the targets. We can also extend Truth's Wake whenever it critically strikes. So it's really good synergy between our Retribution and Herald of the Sun talent tree. Now, the talents that are optional, for example, I have here Final Reckoning. You can either choose Final Reckoning or Execution Sentence. Both are good options. They're pretty close in value. Execution Sentence gives you a more priority damage profile, while having Final Reckoning gives you that big AoE burst, you know. Even after the nerfs to Final Reckoning and Divine Storm, I think it's still really powerful after 5 targets, you know. At 5 targets, it's I think the breakpoint where it becomes a bit better than Execution Sentence, but having a priority target profile is also important, so it's going to depend on the dungeon, so remember to just pick accordingly. After that, another option is I like to take Empyrean Legacy instead of Empyrean Power. This is because Empyrean Power, well, it's good, it doesn't do anything, almost anything in single target situations, while Empyrean Legacy does. Also, Empyrean Power is kind of random, while Empyrean Legacy is pretty
it's very reliable, you know. It happens every 20 seconds, and it's never gonna miss, you know. Also, the bonus damage from Imperial Legacy Divine Storm is 25%, while the bonus damage for Imperial Power Divine Storm is only 15%. So I value that multiplicative stacking of cooldowns. When you get an Imperial Legacy in your Final Reckoning window, you're gonna do a lot of damage with that. Anyways, it's a choice. So this is my Herald of the Sun Mythic Plus build. Now let's go to the raid build. Okay, so the raid build for Herald of the Sun is basically the same on the Paladin side of the talent tree. There are some minor changes that we're going to be doing, actually only 3. We're going to take, instead of AoE crowd control utility, we're going to be taking stuff that improves our movement speed or improves our survivability in raid fights. You know, things like Obdurancy that gives you 2% avoidance plus 2% movement speed, or Seasoned Warhorse that gives you 2 extra seconds of force so you can move out of mechanics, go soak stuff, you know, all the raid things. And finally, the other change is going to be Vengeful Wrath that we're going to be taking instead of Divine Purpose. In single target, this combines really powerfully with Blessing of Anshe. Whenever you get a Blessing of Anshe proc, your Hammer of Wrath is going to get increased by 200%, and you add on top of that the 50% from Vengeful Wrath. You know, multiplicative stacking of cooldowns is going to make that Hammer of Wrath hit by a lot. Now let's move into Herald of the Sun. Well, it's gonna be the same thing as Mythic Plus. There's not much to talk about. We're still going to take in Gleaming Rays, and we're still going to take Blessing of Anshe. On the Retribution side of the talent tree, we do have some changes. Instead of Light's Justice, we're taking Swift Justice so we can spam our judgments a bit more often and get that mastery proc, you know, damage on. After that, we're going to be taking most of our single target stuff, you know, Vanguard's Momentum, Rush of Light so we can get extra haste. Obviously, Vanguard's Momentum synergizes really well with Vengeful Wrath and Blessing of Anshe, making us really powerful on execute boss fights. Other than that, we're going to take the new talent, Holy Flames, which increases our AoE passively. Divine Storm does 10% extra damage, and now also can spread Expurgation to other targets. This is really good because it gives us just some nice cleave on top of some extra single target benefits. The single target benefits comes with that last phrase there. You deal 3% increased holy damage to targets burning from your expurgation. Obviously, your main target is always going to be burning with that expurgation, so flat 3% damage gain from this talent. Other things that we have to mention here is we're not going to take anything like Burning Crusade or Searing Light. We're going with the Divine Arbiter, Executioner's Will, and we're always going to go for Execution Sentence in Radiant scenarios because it's mostly single target and priority damage there, so just Execution Sentence is a lot better than Final Reckoning. Some things that you can change here: if you want to go for a more cleavy version of this build, you can remove a point from Vanguard's Momentum and put it in Bless's Champion, and remove a point from, let's say, Imperial Power, Imperial Legacy, and put it into Tempest of the Lightbringer. Something like that would give you a nice balance between AoE and single target. But if you mostly care on doing boss damage, this build is really powerful and still, like I said, has some cleave potential because of Holy Flames. Now let's go into the Templar builds. As we did for Herald, let's do a description of the main mechanics of Templar. Hammer of Light is the most important. It's a 5 holy power spender that you can cast after using Wake of Ashes. It does massive damage and it basically starts the Templar rotation. As soon as you use it, you will also start throwing Imperial Hammers from the sky passively with your spells and the talent Shake to Heavens. Both things happen just on their own, so you don't really have to worry too much about them. The last thing to mention is Light's Deliverance. You passively get stacks when using spells, and at 60 you can throw a free Hammer of Light. I recommend tracking these stacks so you can plan ahead when this happens. And well, those are the basics of Templar. Okay guys, now let's talk about Templar builds, and this one is for Mythic Plus. And you might notice it's exactly the same as the Herald of the Sun build. And yes, it is exactly the same. So I'm not going to dwell too much in the Paladin or Retribution aspects of the build, because the same explanation I did for Herald applies here. You know, you can still take on Retribution side Imperial Legacy or Imperial Power, or you can still take Final Reckoning or Execution Sentence. It's basically a choice on what profile you want to fill in the Mythic Plus dungeon. On the Paladin side, you still take most of your Paladin utility, you know, take your crowd control utility, take your optional utility if needed in form of Cleanse Toxins. I would always recommend going with Sacrifice and Protection, though I just kind of feel naked if I don't have those tools. What I really wanted to talk about most is the Templar talents, because they are a bit more interesting than the Herald of the Sun talents. Although I enjoy playing Herald of the Sun more, I have to give it to Templar. The design is a bit more finessed, you know. One thing is that Templar still is not its time mostly because we don't have enough stats to make it work properly. Wrathful Descent is one example of that. When Empyrean Hammers critically strike, 100% of its damage is dealt to nearby enemies. So the AoE damage of Templar is conditioned, well, at least the uncapped AoE damage from Templar is conditioned on critting. If you don't crit, it's just going to hit one thing. So currently we don't have too much crit, especially because we are using also Crusade. That doesn't give us crit, give us haste, but it doesn't give us crit, so we don't have a guaranteed way to Wrathful Descent all the time. This talent is really powerful, and I think it's going to scale like a monster. It also has an extra really powerful secondary defensive effect, which enemies hit by this deal 5% reduced damage to you for 8 seconds. That's a long time for that damage reduction, and it reduces all damage, not only AoE, not only single target, all the things that mob is going to do is going to do less. So yeah, really powerful, but still don't have the stats to use it properly. Other things I wanted to mention is that the Sacrosanct Crusade from Templar, it's incredibly powerful defensive. It got nerfed a lot in the beta. It now currently gives you 2 barriers of 10% health if you have 5 targets to hit. The first barrier after you use Wake of Ashes, 10% health, max health shield, and the second barrier can be from 5% to 10% depending on how many targets you are hitting. If you are not full health, it won't be a barrier, but it will be, the second part would be a 10% heal if you hit 5 things, or a 5% heal if you only hit 1. So it's a very, very powerful defensive. It's also preventative in nature, so that's one of the better forms of defense you can have. We can also talk about the choice notes here for Templar. We have Zealot's Vindication and From Whom the Bell Tolls. In Mythic Plus situations, you don't want From Whom the Bell Tolls, because if you have 5 targets, this talent basically does nothing. While Zealot's Vindication works in all situations, just instantly throws 2 Empyrean Hammers on your targets, just boosting your starting burst, you know. So after that, let's talk about the next node, and this is Endless Wrath versus Sanctification. You always want to take Sanctification, mostly because we use Divine Toll, and whenever you throw a judgment on a target, the Empyrean Hammers are going to deal 10% extra damage. Multiple applications of this may overlap. Even though critting is not guaranteed with Wrathful Descent, this is still incredibly powerful because you're going to always have like overlapping judgments, so this is not only going to do 10%, sometimes can do 20, 30, and if you crit, it's doing it to all targets there, so really powerful. The other option was Endless Wrath. Well, it sounds good, you know, resetting your Hammer of Wrath. Hammer of Wrath is not used too often because it only hits one thing, while at least your Empyrean Hammers have the chance to hit more things, so that's why it has a bit more value there. All in all, Templar is pretty fun to play in Mythic Plus situations. But after the Herald bug fixes, that became easier to play and works better with the stat budget we currently have, while Templar still has that conditional AoE from Wrathful Descent. Okay, now let's talk about the Templar single target build for raids. So, you might notice that this is almost exactly the same as the Herald version. And you are right, this is almost exactly the same. But there is one small change in the Templar tree, and there's one small change in the Paladin tree. Then the Paladin one is here at the last part. Instead of Vengeful Wrath for Templar, we're going to go with Divine Purpose. Because Hammer of Light is technically a Holy Power spender, sometimes you get a proc of Divine Purpose and you can save yourself 5 Holy Power at the start of your burst, giving you more Holy Power to spend, you know, so you can spam more stuff. And the other change is here on the Templar talent tree. Instead of taking Zealot's Vindication for raid situations, we're going to take From Whom the Bell Tolls. This makes Divine Toll grant up to 100% increased damage to your next 3 judgments when striking only one enemy. So this is going to be useful in fights where there's only one thing. If there's more adds, rather change it to Zealot's Vindication. As for the explanation on the Retribution and Paladin sides, basically the same. For Paladin, you want to take most of your mobility to get around the raid, and in the Retribution side, you want to take most of your single target talents. Execution Sentence is still going to be our talent cooldown of choice. And well guys, those are the talent builds. Now let's go into the stats. Okay guys, let's talk about stats. So luckily for us, for both Herald and Templar, we are following the same type of stat distribution. Mastery is our god, our lord, our savior, everything, you know. Blizzard made Mastery so incredibly powerful for us, they had to nerf it by 10%, you know. And even after the nerf, it's still incredibly strong. So our stats go something like this: Mastery, Strength, Critical Strike, Haste, and Versatility. If you want to get rid of a stat, get rid of versatility. Literally get rid of all versatility. It's by far our worst stat, and even though it does give you some damage reduction, it's not worth to have it because of the damage you lose. Also, one more thing I want to explain. What does it mean to have mastery as higher than main stat? That means that sometimes if you have a lower piece of gear, a lower item level piece of gear that has mastery, sometimes it can be better than a higher level piece of gear that doesn't have mastery. Let's say a mastery haste piece of gear or mastery crit piece of gear that is lower item level versus a verse haste piece of gear. You know, the mastery one sometimes will be a lot higher in value, but that's also going to depend on your personal stat weights, you know, so always try to sim yourself. Okay guys, now let's talk about consumables and how to gem and enchant your gear. So first of all, the most important slot of us is the weapon. So for this you want to get Stormbound Artistry. This is just an incredible enchant that's going to give you a proc of mastery, and we love mastery. After that, for your cloak you want to get your Chant of Winged Grace, or you want to get a Whisper of Silken Avoidance. Both give you avoidance in certain amounts, and it's just a really nice stat to prevent damage. The next slot is the chest, and you want to get your Crystalline Radiance. This is just going to give you a nice amount of main stat, which is pretty good for us. Next up, we have the Bracers. You want to get the Chant of Armored Avoidance. I think it's just the better enchantment that you can get to prevent more damage. For legs, you want to get your Stormbound Armor Kit. That's going to give you main stat and also some stamina. For your boots, you want to get Scout's March. It's the only enchantment that you can put here. It just gives you a nice amount of speed. And for your ring, you want to get either Radiant Master, or if you're feeling a bit risky, you can take Cursed Mastery, which is going to sap away some of your critical strike, but is going to give you more mastery in return. Both are good options. Okay, next up, let's talk about gems. So you can only have one diamond, which is called the Culminating Blasphemite. That's the best one for us. This diamond has a special property that it gives you primary stat, but for every different color of gem you use, it's gonna give you 15% critical strike effect on your spells, which is pretty good. So that incentivizes you to get different colored of gems. As for gems, the best gems that we can get are either the Quick Onyx or the Deadly Onyx. But because we have the Blasphemite, we want to get other colors. So we can also get the Masterful Emerald or the Masterful Ruby. Those are really good. You can even get the Masterful Sapphire to get the full effect of your Blasphemite. And to end this section, we're going to talk about temporary consumables. So for your flask, you want your Flask of Tempered Mastery. For your combat potion, you want your Tempered Potion. For your health potion, you want Algari Healing Potion. For your weapon buff, you want the Iron Claw Whetstone. So this one is actually really expensive at the moment. I think it costs around 4k a pop. So if you can't get the Whetstone, you can also get by with the Algari Oil. This oil is very cheap. It costs like 200 gold, I think, the rank 3. So you can get it very accessibly. It only gives you critical strike and haste, which is different from the Iron Claw Whetstone that gives you a bunch of like attack power, which is just primary stat. But if you don't have enough gold for it, the oil can save you. As for Augment Rune, if you're really pushing hard, you can get the Crystallized Augment Rune, but if you're just going casually, I would recommend just ignoring it because the price will probably go up by the week that the raid starts. As for food, you can get the Feast, which is the sushi special, or you can get the personal food that's called Jester's Board. Both give you main stat. Now let's go and talk about special gear. Okay guys, now let's talk about gear. So I'm going to talk about trinkets here and also embellishments. So first of all, for your trinkets, there's only 3 trinkets that are really good for us. I have 2 of them here. The first one is the Skarmorak Shard. This is incredibly powerful for Mythic Plus dungeons because not only it has an unused mastery effect, you also get extra mastery while killing stuff in the dungeon, you know, so you're gonna stack that up to 5 times. It's really powerful, really useful in Mythic Plus situations. Now, for raiding, instead of using the shard, you can use the Mark of Kadros. So let me look here for the dungeon. It is Cataclysm and it's Green Battle. So this Mark of Kadros will drop at higher item level for us, and it's basically the same effect as the Skarmorak Shard. It has the same cooldown, but instead of giving you the mastery just passively, it gives you just the whole mastery on the on-use effect. So this Mark of Kadros is a bit better for Radiant situations, while the Skarmorak Shard is going to be a bit better for Mythic Plus situations. The second trinket that we are going to use, well, in our second slot, is going to be the Arakara Sackboard. This thing is just incredibly powerful. The strength it gives you can stack like way high. I have like 5 stacks of this thing, giving me almost like 4000 strength at this item level. The haste is also nice just to make your rotation smooth, and the egg, that whenever it hatches, does just passive damage on your target. You know, we do not boost it by too much because we're no longer using a lot of versatility, but that just mostly just icing on the cake. Okay, now let's talk about our embellishments. So this part is very fast. The best one that you can get is down thread linen. This one is basically the same thing as the blue silken linen was in Dragonflight, but instead of giving you mastery, this one gives you critical strike, and critical strike is a pretty decent stat for us. Also, it's not as punishing as the blue silken linen because this one drops off after 80% health, while the linen was at 90%. So you're going to have a higher uptime of this down thread linen critical strike. Now let's go to the final part of the video, openers and rotations. Okay guys, in this final part I'll show you 2 openers for Herald and 2 openers for Templar. In one of them I'll use Divine Toll at max crusade stacks, and in the other one I'll use it at start. Both are viable. I will also use Final Reckoning for these demonstrations, but if you're going for Execution Sentence, just replace it where I used the Final Reckoning. It should be basically the same. Okay guys, so this is a Herald of the Sun where we use our Divine Toll at max crusade stacks. We start with Blade of Justice, Judgment, Final Reckoning, then we use Wake of Ashes and start our rotation, building stacks of crusade until we reach 10. After that we use Divine Toll, our Imperial Legacy proc, and then we keep doing our rotation as normal, trying to spam as much Blade of Justice as we can because this is an AoE scenario, so Blade of Justice does a lot. Also remember to weave in those judgments in between your Divine Toll ones. In this opener, we're going to use Divine Toll at the start. This one is more useful for when you just want the Divine Toll for generation of Holy Power in between your cooldowns. And the other one is more if you want Divine Toll for the damage. As you can see, we start Divine Toll, Final Reckoning. After that, we just spend Wake of Ashes, keep doing our rotation as normal. And after that part, we just keep spending and building with Blade of Justice as much as we can because it does a ton of damage. Okay, this is a Templar with Divine Toll with max stacks Crusade. So we start with Judgment, Wake of Ashes, Final Reckoning, our Hammer of Light, and then build stacks up to 10, throw our Divine Toll, throw our Imperial Legacy, and after that just keep building and spending, trying to throw as many as Blade of Justice as we can in Judgments without overcapping too much on Holy Power. And well guys, in this last one we're going to be doing a Templar with Divine Toll at the start. After that is Final Reckoning, spend, Wake of Ashes, Hammer of Light, and then just keep building and spending until we get 10 stacks of Crusade and just spam our abilities as much as we can without overcapping on Holy Power. It's gonna happen sometimes, but don't worry about it. As long as you keep building and spending, you're going to be doing fine as a Retribution Paladin. And well guys, that's going to be the end of the video. By the way, before I forget, I'll leave all the links to the builds that you saw here in the description, as well as all my weak auras to track important stuff. I hope this was useful and you enjoyed it. And if you did, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching everyone.